information to share. This just in from a senior U.S. defense official who says Russia has now committed nearly 100% of its combat power that had been staged on the border of Ukraine. And Russia has launched 625 missiles against Ukraine so far. That from that senior U.S. defense official. President Biden consulting with top European allies this morning about additional ways to punish the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. There's growing pressure here in the United States to ban all Russian oil imports. And the Biden administration is trying to work a deal to transfer some Polish fighter jets to Ukraine. Ukrainian officials continue to appeal for a NATO-enforced no-fly zone over Ukraine. But the alliance views that, at least at the moment, as far too dangerous. The vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee explains why.
That means flying AWACS 24 hours a day. That means the willingness to shoot down and engage Russian airplanes in the sky. That means World War III.
With us to share their reporting and their insights, Margaret Taleb of Axios, Ola Renipa of the Washington Post, and Sabrina Siddiqui of the Wall Street Journal. So the NATO no to a no-fly zone is holding for now. One alternative on the table to help with additional air power, in addition you send in anti-aircraft missiles, you send in anti-tank missiles, is this idea of potential swap with Poland. Poland has some old Soviet-era MiG fighter jets. That's what the Ukrainian Air Force flies. Have Poland send them in. The United States would bring in some U.S. jets to back up Poland, if you will. How viable?
It could be viable in terms of allowing the Ukrainians to essentially have the fight on their own. You're not going to have a no-fly zone. You're not going to have NATO come in and get into direct combat with the Russians, but allowing the Ukrainians, who have shown incredible fight so far, to stage some of this fight on their own. Have some of the fighter jets come in from Poland. The United States seems very willing to backfill some of those orders. We heard Secretary of State Blinken on all of the Sunday shows yesterday essentially saying if Poland or other NATO countries provide some of these jets over to the Ukrainians, that the U.S. would send jets over to those other NATO countries. So it could be one way to provide additional firepower to the Ukrainians, especially since we've seen the Russians really struggle to meet up with their timeline. They essentially wanted to be done with this war by now, and it seems like it's going to be a much longer fight.
But is it viable, and is it going to imperil Poland? Is this really what Poland wants, and does it create more kindling for the spark that everybody is hoping to avoid in terms of bringing NATO countries into it? So for every action, including this, there is maybe not an equal and opposite reaction, but there is an implication for every action. And so you see this problem as you're trying to figure out, how do you empower Ukraine? How do you deal with an oil embargo? How do you deal with all of these things? That there's a political imperative and a humanitarian imperative to do something now, but there are long-term consequences for all of these steps.
Right. If you look at the statement out of the Polish government, they're essentially saying there's no such plan, except unless NATO, as an alliance, said it must be the plan. In other words, we're not doing this on our own. We're not doing this on our own. And that's critical to keep the alliance together, which is one of the reasons President Biden has pushed back against those who have said, why not more aggressive sanctions? Why not instantly go essentially to the top level, go all the way up? He said, I have to keep 30 nations involved. I'm trying to get other nations around the world in addition to the NATO alliance. Just got off a phone call, ran a little longer than an hour, with the Prime Minister of the UK, the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany. One of the issues there is, I'll come to the U.S. calculation in a minute, one of the ideas is to further punish Putin, just put a ban, an outright embargo on buying Russian oil.
This is something that the Biden administration is now exploring. Reluctant is doing a ban on Russian oil imports, and it's something that Secretary of State Antony Blinken said they want to do in coordination with their European partners because they think it's much more effective if this is done across the board rather than the U.S. taking this step unilaterally. Now, this has been something that Germans, as you point out, have also been reluctant to do. But frankly, for the Biden administration, there's been concern about rising gas prices. They've obviously already increased alongside inflation here at home. So what would also be the impact on American consumers if they were to issue some kind of embargo on Russian oil? But they faced growing pressure from bipartisan members of Congress to take this particular step. And so in doing so, they're also looking for ways, if they go that far, to temper oil prices here at home, which includes now meeting with officials in Venezuela and discussing perhaps easing oil sanctions on the Venezuelans to pour more oil back into the global market, perhaps even a meeting with the Saudis. We know that those relationships significantly frayed over human rights concerns and the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So it's something the Biden administration is moving toward, and based on my conversations with administration officials, it seems like it's going to be inevitable, but again, a step that they want to take with other NATO partners.
And the part you just mentioned, the complicated pieces of the puzzle of bad actors. Let's call them now I'm being polite. The puzzle of bad actors, in the sense that because you need to rally the world against Putin, and the impact of that on oil markets could impact everybody in terms of higher prices, gas supplies, disrupt economies. The Biden administration being more friendly to Venezuela and opening the door to conversations with the Saudis after when President Biden came to office, he was trying to draw a much tougher line because of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
This is big time politics, and everything is relative, and we're seeing all of that. And when you look at the world, there's not a lot of good actors, right? I mean, when you're dealing with energy, which is what all of this is, ultimately comes down to two levers: energy and its impact on the economy, and the threat of nuclear weapons and what it would mean for the U.S. and any country in the world to imperil itself against a country that also has nuclear weapons. But I think what we're seeing here, look, Biden has domestic pressures as well. He's got Democrats as well as Republicans pushing for the oil embargo. He's got Republicans saying, if you don't do it, we're going to beat you over the head. And if you do it and prices that go up, we're also going to beat you over the head because you haven't expanded domestic drilling. Mike Pence pouring money into a campaign to attack Democratic incumbents, we're reporting today, over the prospect of higher oil prices. This is tricky stuff. Biden is going to be pressed to make a decision soon that's going to have major political implications.
And to the point about tricky stuff, last week the administration was saying, A, we don't want to do anything unilaterally, B, we don't want to do anything that would disrupt global energy supplies. But Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, in her letter to Democratic colleagues, called for the Russian oil embargo. Speaker Pelosi is not going to do that without making a phone call to the White House first. She believes that maybe they're pushing the train out of the station, but that train's about to leave the station.
Yeah, and it doesn't make it makes things easier for the White House to have both top Democrats both in the Senate and the House pushing for this, as well as some Republicans pushing for this. Even though, as Margaret said, Republicans are going to attack the White House over these price increases that we're seeing at the gas pump, and that is something they have to be incredibly very aware of because people are going to be going on their summer vacations in a matter of months, and if the gas prices are $5 a gallon, it's going to be very difficult.
They're already
And I
now
think
dollars like
Zelensky has been very clear that more action needs to be taken, and of course we've seen this reluctance on the part of the U.S. and NATO allies to directly get involved in some sort of conflict with Russia. So it's more about what else can the administration do to provide both military and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine at this time. Also the question of whether or not the U.S. will label Putin's actions a war crime. That's something now that the administration has a process for evaluating. So those are some of the key actions we're looking at this week.
It's a Monday and a critical week ahead, obviously, as they start to put all these pieces together. Everybody stay put. Appreciate the time here.